My mother forged my name and drained my life savings just because I refused to pay my sister's $50,000 credit card debt. When I found out, I did not scream or cry. I kept quiet and used my skills as a forensic accountant to track every single penny. The next day, a loud knock arrived at their luxury penthouse, bringing the FBI right to their front door. I am Naomi, 33 years old, and I work as a forensic accountant at a top auditing firm in Chicago. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to set hard boundaries with toxic relatives who only saw you as an ATM. Growing up in the Chicago suburbs, my mother Brenda made it perfectly clear who the golden child was. My younger sister Stephanie could do no wrong. While I was studying late into the night to earn my degree and build a solid career in finance, Stephanie was building an Instagram following and burning through our parents' money. When Stephanie married Jamal, the family dynamics shifted from bad to unbearable. Jamal came from a wealthy, highly respected African American family with deep roots in Chicago real estate. He was a bank branch director, arrogant, deeply image-obsessed, and utterly convinced that anyone making less than $1 million a year was entirely beneath his notice. My mother constantly bent over backward to impress Jamal and his family, treating them like royalty while treating me like the family disappointment because I chose a quiet, practical life over flashy luxury. The breaking point happened at my parents' anniversary dinner. We were at a high-end steakhouse downtown, the kind of place where the waiters wear white gloves and the steaks cost more than a car payment. My father Richard was sitting quietly at the end of the table, sipping his scotch and avoiding conflict as usual. Jamal and Stephanie were holding court, bragging to Jamal's affluent parents about their upcoming luxury vacation to Dubai. I was just trying to eat my dinner in peace, counting down the minutes until it was socially acceptable to leave. Right before the dessert course arrived, my mother slid her chair closer to mine. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a thick envelope. Under the cover of the loud restaurant chatter, she dropped a crumpled credit card statement directly onto my plate. I glanced down at the bold red numbers at the bottom of the page. $50,000. I looked at my mother, completely confused. She leaned in, her voice a harsh whisper that smelled of expensive wine and sheer desperation. "Stephanie is in a little trouble," she said, her eyes darting nervously toward Jamal and his parents across the table. "She has been putting a few lifestyle expenses on secret credit cards, and the collection agencies are starting to call the house." "Jamal cannot find out about this, Naomi. His family would be mortified. They value financial responsibility above everything. You need to pay this off immediately to save the family dignity." I stared at her, genuinely thinking she had lost her mind. I worked 60-hour weeks analyzing corporate fraud, tracking hidden assets, and saving every single dollar to buy my own house. Now she wanted me to wipe out my hard-earned savings to cover my sister's shopping addiction. I pushed the statement back across the white tablecloth. "Absolutely not," I said, keeping my voice low but incredibly firm. "Stephanie is 29 years old. If she is $50,000 in debt, she needs to tell her husband and deal with the consequences of her own actions. I'm not bailing her out so she can keep playing pretend on social media." My mother's face turned a dangerous shade of red. "You are her sister," she hissed, grabbing my wrist under the table. "We are family. You have the money sitting uselessly in a savings account while your sister's marriage is on the line. You are being incredibly selfish." I did not realize our voices had risen until the entire table fell silent. Jamal had stopped talking to his parents and was looking directly at us. He had incredibly sharp hearing, a trait that made him a ruthless banker, but an insufferable brother-in-law. He reached across the table and snatched the statement from in front of my mother before I could stop him. I braced myself, expecting him to be furious with Stephanie. I expected a massive argument right there in the restaurant about financial infidelity. Instead, Jamal glanced at the $50,000 balance, let out a short, dismissive laugh, and tossed the paper back to my mother. He looked at me with absolute disgust. "Really, Naomi," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You are making a scene over pocket change. Your sister is accustomed to a certain standard of living, something a low-level bean counter like you clearly does not understand. If you were a real sister, you would take care of this petty cash issue without whining. You are just jealous because Stephanie married into success while you are still crunching numbers in a tiny cubicle. I sat there stunned by the sheer audacity of his response. Stephanie was smiling smugly, sipping her champagne as if her husband had just defended her honor instead of enabling her financial disaster. Jamal's parents looked away, clearly uncomfortable with the outburst, but completely unwilling to correct their arrogant son. My own father simply stared at his plate, too cowardly to stand up for me against his wealthy son-in-law. I realized then that I was entirely alone at that table. I was not family to them. I was just a resource they felt entitled to exploit and a punching bag for their egos. I picked up my purse and stood up. The scraping of my chair echoed loudly in the tense silence. "I am leaving," I announced, clearly making sure every person at the table heard me. "And I'm not paying a single cent of that debt. Good luck managing your standard of living, Stephanie." I turned and walked away from the table, my heels clicking against the polished hardwood floor of the restaurant. My mother chased after me, catching my arm just as I reached the heavy glass exit doors. Her grip was painfully tight, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my skin. She pulled me close, her eyes blazing with a toxic fury I had never seen before. "You will regret turning your back on this family," she hissed, her voice trembling with raw rage. "We gave you everything, and you leave us to deal with this mess. You will pay for this, Naomi. Mark my words." I pulled my arm out of her grasp, completely unfazed by her dramatics. "Have a good night, Mom," I said smoothly. I walked out into the cool Chicago air, feeling a massive sense of relief wash over me. I thought setting that boundary was the end of the drama. I thought I had finally protected my peace and put my toxic family behind me. I had no idea that my mother's threat was not just anger speaking. She was already planning to take what she believed I owed them, and she was willing to commit a federal crime to do it. The morning sun had barely begun to filter through the blinds when my phone shattered the silence. It was exactly 6 in the morning. I reached to my nightstand expecting a routine alarm or an email from a client. Instead, a glaring red banner stretched across my screen. It was an urgent fraud alert from my primary bank. My heart fluttered against my ribs. I sat up immediately, the lingering exhaustion vanishing as adrenaline flooded my system. I unlocked my phone and tapped the notification, my fingers moving with practiced speed. The banking application loaded, the familiar blue circle spinning. It spun for an eternity before the dashboard appeared. I navigated straight to my primary savings account. This was the account I had spent the last 8 years building. It was my house fund, a meticulously managed portfolio of deposits representing every overtime shift, every skipped vacation, and every bonus I had ever earned. The balance was supposed to be $150,000, the exact amount I needed for a down payment on a beautiful brownstone in the Lincoln Park neighborhood. I stared at the screen, blinking hard, convincing myself the application was experiencing a massive display error. The numbers glaring back at me were impossible. The balance was 0. A cold, hollow sensation opened up in my stomach. I refreshed the application, pulling the screen down with my thumb. The spinning wheel appeared again, but the result remained unchanged. $0.00. I quickly moved to the transaction history, my breath catching in my throat. There, logged at exactly 8:15 the previous morning, just hours before our disastrous anniversary dinner, was a massive outgoing wire transfer. The entire sum of $150,000 had been moved in a single, swift bank transaction. The destination account was masked, showing only the last 4 digits of a routing number I did not recognize. This was not a simple credit card skim. This was a manual wire transfer, an action requiring multiple layers of verification, and an in-person authorization at a physical bank branch. My mind raced, but my professional instincts took over. I did not panic. I did not dissolve into tears. I dialed the emergency contact number for my bank fraud department, listening to the slow, ringing tone as I paced across my bedroom floor. After 10 minutes of holding patiently waiting, a senior account manager named David answered the line. He asked for my security details, which I provided with crisp mechanical precision. I explained that an unauthorized wire transfer of $150,000 had drained my savings account the previous morning. I heard the clicking of his keyboard as he pulled up my profile. The line went silent for a few moments, the tension stretching tight across the phone connection. Miss Naomi, the manager, finally said, his tone shifting into a careful cadence. According to our internal records, this transfer was fully authorized in person locally by someone. It occurred at our North Side branch. I stopped pacing, my bare feet frozen against the cold hardwood floor. That is physically impossible, I replied, keeping my voice dangerously level. I was at my corporate office on the South Side all day yesterday. I never set foot inside a bank branch, and I certainly never authorized the removal of my life savings. There was another long pause on the other end of the line. The manager cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. Miss Naomi, the transaction was not authorized by you directly. It was authorized by your own mother Brenda yesterday. She presented a fully executed and notarized power of attorney document, granting her complete financial control over your accounts. She provided her identification, the original paperwork, and the transfer destination details. Because she possessed legal authorization, the branch manager on duty approved the wire transfer. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. A notarized power of attorney. My mother had physically walked into a federal financial institution, presented forged legal documents, and convinced a bank manager to hand over my future. She stole the money 12 hours before looking me in the eye directly at dinner. She did this before demanding I pay off my sister Stephanie and her $50,000 debt before threatening me on the sidewalk. She already had the money. The dinner was a performance, a twisted test of my loyalty to keep me distracted while the wire cleared. The sheer audacity of her actions washed over me, replacing the initial shock with a profound, icy clarity. I thanked the bank manager, instructed him to freeze all remaining accounts, and ended the call. I stood by the window, watching the city below wake up. My mother thought she was dealing directly now with the obedient daughter who would fold under family pressure. She thought because we shared a bloodline, she could cross any boundary, and I would simply swallow the loss to avoid a public scandal. She thought I would protect her. She completely forgot what I do for a living. I do not just balance books. I dismantle complex financial crimes. I track missing millions across international borders. I expose highly sophisticated corporate thieves who spend years covering their tracks. In her arrogant desperation to fund Stephanie and her lavish lifestyle and impress Jamal and his very wealthy parents, my own mother had left a glaring trail of digital and physical evidence. She had committed wire fraud, identity theft, and bank fraud, all carrying severe federal penalties. I walked over to my oak dresser and opened the top drawer. I bypassed my jewelry, reaching into the compartment where I kept my work credentials. I pulled out my laminated forensic accountant identification badge, tracing the raised lettering with my thumb. The cold metal clip felt reassuring. I did not pick up my phone to scream at my mother. I simply smiled, a very chilling smile. You picked the wrong daughter to rob. I arrived at my office at 7:30, navigating the quiet corridors of the high-rise building long before the regular corporate crowd started filtering in. The silence of the accounting floor was a stark contrast to the storm raging inside my mind. I swiped my keycard, letting myself into my glass-walled office, and immediately booted up my workstation. The three large monitors hummed to life, casting a cold blue glow across my desk. This was my sanctuary. This was where I dissected offshore accounts, unraveled complex money laundering schemes, and exposed embezzlement rings that had operated undetected for years. My mother had no concept of what forensic accounting actually entailed. To her, I was just a glorified calculator, a boring sibling to Stephanie's glamorous existence. I accessed the firm's proprietary tracking software, a powerful tool designed to follow digital breadcrumbs across multiple financial institutions. I needed to see exactly where my money had gone. The bank manager had confirmed the initial wire transfer, but that was just the first hop. Criminals, even amateur ones like my mother, rarely leave stolen funds sitting in a single easily traceable account. They move it, they launder it, or they spend it immediately. I typed in the routing number of the destination account the bank manager had provided. The software churned for a few tense seconds before displaying the account details. It was a joint checking account registered under Brenda and Richard, my parents. I stared at the screen, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. She had not even bothered to use a shell account. She had simply wired the money straight into her own bank. But the money had not stayed there. The timeline of transactions unfolded before my eyes, like a map of pure, unadulterated greed. Less than an hour after my house fund hit their joint account, a payment of exactly $50,000 was pushed out. The destination was a major credit card issuer. That settled Stephanie's debt, just as my mother had demanded at dinner. She had stolen my future to erase my sister's reckless past. But that only accounted for a third of the stolen funds. There was still $100,000 unaccounted for. My mother could have stopped there. She could have paid off the debt, returned the rest, and begged for forgiveness. But narcissists do not possess a stopping point when they feel entitled to what is yours. I traced the remaining balance. 2 hours later, a second wire transfer was initiated. This one was for $98,500. I leaned closer to the monitor, tracking the routing number. The destination was not another bank account or a credit card company. It was a commercial business account. The name of the registered business appeared on the screen, and my heart turned to ice. It was an exclusive, high-end luxury car dealership located in the Gold Coast neighborhood. They sold imported European vehicles, the kind of cars that announced your wealth before you even stepped out of the driver's seat. I accessed the public registry records, cross-referencing the dealership's recent sales with the wire transfer data. The picture became horrifyingly clear. My mother had not just paid off Stephanie's embarrassing debt. She had used the remaining $100,000 of my life savings to purchase a brand new Porsche Macan. I pulled up the registration data linked to the transaction. The vehicle was not registered to my parents. It was titled entirely in Stephanie's name. The puzzle pieces clicked into place, forming a sickening image of my family's betrayal. Tomorrow was Jamal and Stephanie's second wedding anniversary. The lavish party they were throwing at Jamal's penthouse was not just a celebration of their marriage. It was the stage for a grand reveal. My mother had stolen my money to buy a luxury vehicle so Stephanie could present it to Jamal as an anniversary gift. She had funded a grand romantic gesture to cement Stephanie's status in Jamal's wealthy family, ensuring they continued to look like the perfect affluent couple. My mother had literally stolen my future home to buy my sister a sports car. The sheer, unapologetic malice of it took my breath away. They had sat across from me at that steakhouse eating expensive cuts of meat and sipping champagne, knowing exactly what they had done. They had watched Jamal humiliate me, calling me a low-level bean counter, while they were actively preparing to hand him the keys to a Porsche bought with my blood, sweat, and tears. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, the hum of the servers providing the only sound in my office. Most people would have shattered. They would have called the police, crying, or confronted their family in a hysterical rage. But the discipline of forensic accounting requires emotional detachment. You cannot build a bulletproof case when you are blinded by tears. I needed to document every single transaction, every forged document, and every digital footprint my mother had carelessly left behind. I needed to build a case so devastating, so legally airtight, that no high-priced lawyer Jamal hired could ever dismantle it. I sent a secure request to my bank's fraud department, formally requesting a certified copy of the power of attorney document my mother had used. Because the account was legally mine, they were obligated to provide it. The PDF arrived in my secure inbox 20 minutes later. I opened the file and scrutinized the document. The signature at the bottom was a decent forgery mimicking the loops and slants of my handwriting, but it was the notary stamp that caught my attention. It belonged to a local notary public who operated out of a shipping store near my parents' house. A quick check of state records confirmed the notary's license was active. My mother had likely convinced this person she was acting on my behalf, or perhaps she had bribed them. It did not matter. The document was fraudulent, and presenting it to a federal bank constituted a severe felony. I hit print. The heavy laser printer in the corner of my office whirred to life, spitting out page after page of damning evidence. The wire logs, the credit card payment confirmations, the dealership transaction records, the vehicle registration data, and finally the forged power of attorney. I gathered the warm papers and carried them over to the large whiteboard, spanning the wall opposite my desk. I grabbed a handful of red magnetic pins and began pinning the documents to the board, arranging them in chronological order. I drew thick black lines connecting the bank accounts, the dealerships, and the names of my family members. It was a murder board not of a physical life, but of a financial one. My mother had attempted to murder my financial future to elevate her golden child. I stood back and surveyed the completed timeline. It was a masterpiece of arrogance and stupidity. They had underestimated me entirely. They thought my silence at dinner was a sign of defeat. They thought I would simply absorb the blow and fade into the background just as I always had. I reached out and tapped the paper showing the Porsche registration in Stephanie's name. "I am going to take everything from you," I whispered to the empty room. Everything. The silence of my office was broken by the buzzing of my cell phone on my desk. A notification popped up on my screen. It was an Instagram alert. I kept an account mostly to monitor subjects I investigated. Today, the algorithm pushed a different subject to my feed. Stephanie had just published a video reel. I tapped the notification, my expression blank as the video began to play. The scene opened in the circular driveway of Jamal's luxury building. The camera panned to reveal a gleaming midnight black Porsche Macan parked directly in front of the main entrance. A red velvet bow was strapped to the hood. Stephanie stepped into the frame wearing a designer outfit that easily cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She was jumping up and down, squealing with manufactured delight as she waved shiny car keys at the camera. Jamal walked into the shot looking incredibly smug in his tailored suit. He wrapped his arm around my sister, pulling her close as he kissed her cheek. He looked into the camera lens and thanked his mother-in-law for such a generous anniversary gift. The caption beneath the video reel made my stomach churn. It read, "Blessed with the best mom in the world. Thank you for always making my dreams come true and supporting our beautiful marriage." The comment section was flooded with fawning messages from their wealthy social circle. I watched the video loop twice. I watched my sister parade around a vehicle purchased entirely with the money I had spent 8 years saving. I watched Jamal soak up the validation, unaware his perfect lifestyle was propped up by a federal crime. My mother had laundered my stolen savings through a car dealership to buy my sister a shiny toy. I did not leave a comment. I took screenshots capturing the video, the caption, and timestamps. I forwarded the images to my work email, adding them to the dossier of evidence I was compiling. Just as I set my phone back down, the screen illuminated with an incoming text message. I glanced at the caller identification. It was a message from my father, Richard. For my entire life, he played the role of the silent peacekeeper, preferring to look the other way while my mother emotionally abused me. He was the classic enabler, willing to sacrifice my well-being to keep his wife happy. I swiped the screen to open the message, expecting a weak apology for the disastrous dinner the night before. Instead, the paragraph glowing on my screen was a masterclass in cowardly manipulation. "Naomi, I know you must be upset about seeing your bank account this morning," the message read. "Your mother told me what she did. Please try to understand her position. Your sister really needed a win right now. Jamal's family has been putting pressure on them lately, and Stephanie was falling behind. The money was just sitting there in your savings anyway. You make a good salary and you can save it up again. Let her have this moment. Keep the peace for your mother. We are still a family, and we need to protect each other. Do not do anything drastic." I read the message twice, a bitter taste flooding my mouth. Disgust washed over me, heavy and suffocating. My father knew exactly what my mother had done. He knew she had committed a severe felony by forging a legal document to drain my life savings, and he was actively trying to cover it up. He was asking me to simply accept the loss of $150,000 because my sister needed a win to impress her arrogant husband. He wanted me to subsidize their fake luxury lifestyle to keep his house quiet. The delusion of his request told me everything I needed to know about my standing in that family. I was not a daughter to them. I was a financial safety net, an endless resource they felt entitled to plunder. I did not type a response. I did not try to reason with him or explain the magnitude of the laws they had broken. There is no reasoning with people who believe their comfort is worth your destruction. I locked my phone and placed it face down on my desk. The time for family discussions had officially ended the moment my mother presented that forged signature to a bank teller. I turned my attention back to my computer monitors, minimizing the tracking software and opening my secure contact directory. As a forensic accountant handling major fraud cases for a top firm, I had spent years building a robust network of law enforcement contacts. I scrolled past the state regulators and local financial crime units. This situation required a much heavier hand. I needed an entity that did not care about Jamal's social standing, my mother's reputation, or my father's desperate desire to keep the peace. I needed an agency equipped to handle interstate wire fraud and identity theft. I found the contact card I was looking for. Agent Davis, a senior investigator working out of the federal building downtown. We had collaborated on a massive corporate embezzlement case exactly 2 years ago. I picked up the receiver of my office telephone, listening to the crisp dial tone. I punched in the direct extension for the Financial Crimes Division, my fingers moving with unwavering certainty. I listened as the line rang once, then twice. A deep professional voice answered the call on the third ring. I took a slow, measured breath, feeling the last invisible threads tying me to my family snap completely. "Hello, Agent Davis," I said into the receiver, my voice perfectly steady and utterly devoid of emotion. "This is Naomi. I need to schedule an urgent meeting with you this morning. I have a major wire fraud and identity theft case to report, and I have already compiled all the documentary evidence you will need to make an arrest." 2 hours later, I walked through the heavy revolving doors of the federal building downtown. The atmosphere inside was a stark contrast to the plush velvet-lined restaurants and luxury car dealerships my family preferred. It was sterile, quiet, and deeply intimidating. Security personnel scrutinized my identification before directing me to the elevators. I rode up to the Financial Crimes Division, the metallic hum of the elevator car matching the steady, calculated rhythm of my own heartbeat. When the steel doors parted, Agent Davis was already waiting in the reception area. He was a tall, sharply dressed man with silver hair at his temples and the perceptive, unrelenting gaze of a seasoned investigator. We had worked together extensively on a massive corporate embezzlement case 2 years ago, and he knew my reputation for building airtight financial dossiers. He greeted me with a firm handshake, his expression shifting from professional courtesy to genuine concern as he registered the cold, unwavering intensity in my eyes. He led me down a maze of beige corridors into a windowless interrogation room equipped with a heavy metal table and a recording device. I took a seat, placing my leather briefcase on the table with a dull thud. Agent Davis sat across from me, folding his hands and leaning forward. "You mentioned a major wire fraud and identity theft case on the phone, Naomi," he said, keeping his voice low and measured. "Who is the target of the investigation?" I unclasped the brass locks of my briefcase. "The target is Brenda, my biological mother," I replied smoothly. I watched a brief flicker of surprise cross his stoic features, but he remained silent, waiting for me to continue. I pulled out the thick stack of documents I had printed at my office and spread them across the metal table like a dealer laying out a winning hand of cards. I started with the foundation of the crime. "Here is the forged power of attorney document," I explained, sliding the paper toward him. "It was presented to a branch manager at my bank yesterday morning. The signature is a high-quality forgery, but the notary stamp belongs to a local shipping store clerk. I have already cross-referenced the licensing number. My mother used this fraudulent document to gain unauthorized access to my primary savings account." Agent Davis picked up the paper, his eyes scanning the forged signature and the illegitimate notary seal. He set it down and looked at me, prompting me for the rest of the sequence. Next, I presented the wire transfer logs. These are the internal banking records showing a withdrawal of $150,000. The money was routed directly into a joint checking account held by my parents. I highlighted the routing numbers and the timestamp. From there, the funds were split. Exactly $50,000 was wired to a credit card company to clear a debt belonging to my younger sister, Stephanie. I slid the final, most damning piece of evidence across the table. "And here is the remaining $100,000, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. It was wired to a luxury automotive dealership in the Gold Coast district to purchase a brand new Porsche Macan. The vehicle is registered solely in my sister Stephanie's name. They bought it to present as an anniversary gift to her wealthy husband Jamal to maintain their fake facade of high society success." I watched Agent Davis connect the dots. He reviewed the dealership invoice, the wire transfer routing numbers, and the forged legal authorization. The paper trail was absolutely flawless, leaving no room for deniability or reasonable doubt. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling a long breath. "Naomi." He began, carefully choosing his words with deliberate caution. "This is a staggering amount of highly incriminatory evidence. You have essentially done my entire job for me, but I have to ask you a difficult question. The primary suspect here is your own mother. If I process this file, she will face severe federal charges. Wire fraud and identity theft carry mandatory prison sentences. Are you absolutely certain you want to initiate this process? There is no turning back once these documents enter the federal system." I reached into my pocket, unlocked my cell phone, and opened the text message my father had sent me just hours earlier. I placed the illuminated screen on the table, turning it so Agent Davis could read the manipulative, guilt-tripping paragraph. "I want you to read that," I told him. "My father knows exactly what my mother did. He admits to knowing she stole my life savings, and he is asking me to keep the peace and let my sister have the car because she needed a win. They do not view this as a crime. They view my financial destruction as an acceptable sacrifice to preserve their public image and impress Jamal." Agent Davis read the message, his jaw tightening with evident disgust. He pushed the phone back toward me, the last trace of hesitation vanishing from his eyes. He looked at me, clearly impressed by my ruthless clinical efficiency. Most victims of familial theft dissolve into tears or second-guess their decisions out of misplaced loyalty. I simply handed him the weapon needed to destroy them. Agent Davis gathered the pristine documents, tapping the edges against the metal table to align them perfectly. "Consider it done," he stated firmly. "I am having my team draft an immediate federal freeze order for your parents' joint bank accounts. We are also issuing a subpoena for the car dealership records and an arrest warrant for your mother." The wheels of justice had officially started turning, and they were going to crush my family completely. I stood up from the heavy metal table, snapping my leather briefcase closed with a sharp click. The suffocating silence in the sterile interrogation room felt completely different now. It felt like the beginning of my absolute victory. The crisp evening air of Chicago hit my face as I exited the federal building, carrying an empty briefcase and a heart completely devoid of mercy. I hailed a cab, watching the city lights blur past the window, reflecting the cold calculation that had replaced my grief. While Agent Davis mobilized his strike team to secure the federal freeze orders and arrest warrants, I simply needed to go home and wait. The trap was set, the evidence was impenetrable, and the timeline was completely out of my family's control. I unlocked the door to my apartment, a modest space I rented while diligently saving for the brownstone they had just stolen from me. I did not turn on the overhead lights. The glow from the street lamps illuminated the living room, casting long, sharp shadows across the floor. I poured myself a single glass of red wine, walked over to my leather armchair, and sat in the quiet darkness. I placed my phone on the coffee table, watching the digital clock flip to 8 o'clock. The storm was coming, and I had prime seats to watch the destruction. Across the city, in a towering glass high-rise overlooking the majestic expanse of Lake Michigan, a very different scene was unfolding. Stephanie and Jamal were hosting an extravagant anniversary party in their multi-million-dollar penthouse. The air inside their pristine residence was thick with the scent of expensive floral arrangements and the rhythmic popping of vintage champagne corks. A curated guest list of Chicago's elite mingled in the expansive living area. There were banking executives, wealthy socialites, and real estate developers, all people Jamal actively courted to maintain his elevated status. They wore tailored suits and designer dresses, their laughter echoing off the floor to ceiling windows. My mother and father were right in the center of the room, soaking up the validation they so desperately craved. My mother wore a new diamond necklace, no doubt purchased on one of Stephanie's secret maxed-out credit cards, while my father stood beside her, holding a crystal tumbler and pretending the fraudulent transaction from that morning never happened. Jamal held court near the sprawling outdoor balcony, surrounded by his closest colleagues from the financial sector. He swirled amber liquid in his glass, his chest puffed out with arrogant pride as he accepted congratulations on his second wedding anniversary. He was a man who thrived on public adoration, and tonight he was the undisputed king of the room. He motioned for my mother to join his circle, wrapping a heavy arm around her shoulder, with a wide, theatrical smile. "Gentlemen," Jamal announced, his booming voice carrying easily over the ambient jazz music playing through the sound system. "You all know my incredible mother-in-law, Brenda. Let me tell you, I am the luckiest man in this city. Do you know what she surprised us with today? A brand new Porsche Macan, fully paid off, just waiting in the valet circle downstairs." He paused to let the impressed murmurs ripple through his audience of bankers and executives. My mother practically glowed, her face flushed with the intoxicating high of wealthy approval. She placed a manicured hand over her heart, acting the part of the endlessly generous matriarch. "We just want to see our children happy," she preened, leaning into the lie with absolute ease. Jamal chuckled, taking a slow sip of his drink before delivering his favorite punchline. "Well, most of the children," he corrected, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial, mocking tone. "You know Brenda has another daughter, Naomi. She is an accountant somewhere crunching numbers in a basement. We invited her tonight, of course, but she is incredibly bitter about our success. She actually threw a massive tantrum at dinner last night over some petty cash. She simply lacks the class to function in this kind of environment. It is sad, really, how jealousy ruins people." The executives laughed, shaking their heads in mock sympathy, while Stephanie walked over to kiss Jamal on the cheek, fully endorsing the character assassination of her own sister. Back in my apartment, I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine. The silence in my living room was profoundly comforting. I did not need the validation of a crowded room, or the fake adoration of people who evaluated human worth by the brand of car in the driveway. I had the quiet, absolute certainty of justice. I looked at the digital clock on my phone again. It was 8:45. Agent Davis had assured me the tactical team would move swiftly once the judge signed the emergency warrants. Federal agents do not typically wait for morning when dealing with significant flight risks or individuals who have already demonstrated a willingness to forge legal documents. They strike when the target feels safest. I leaned my head back against the leather chair, closing my eyes and imagining the scene playing out across town. I pictured the champagne flutes, the expensive outfits, the arrogant smiles, and the complete utter ignorance of the catastrophe speeding toward their front door. The jazz music continued to play, providing a smooth soundtrack to their delusion. The guests laughed, celebrating a marriage built entirely on fraud and familial betrayal. My mother stood near the kitchen island, accepting another compliment, her smile wide and secure. She truly believed she had won. She believed she had outsmarted me, secured her golden child's place in high society, and permanently silenced the boring practical daughter she despised. But outside the heavy soundproofed double doors of the luxury penthouse, the atmosphere in the carpeted hallway was shifting. The private elevator chimed softly, the polished steel doors sliding open to reveal a group of individuals who did not possess invitations to the anniversary party. They wore thick, dark, tactical vests, their expressions grim and professional. Heavy, authoritative footsteps began to march down the long, quiet corridor, echoing with the promise of absolute ruin, marching directly toward Jamal's front door. The heavy, authoritative footsteps stopped directly in front of the polished mahogany double doors of the penthouse. Inside, the celebration was reaching its peak. The clinking of crystal glasses, the low thrum of the jazz band, and the collective hum of Chicago's wealthy elite created a symphony of manufactured success. Jamal was just finishing another boastful anecdote when the first sound broke through the ambient noise. It was a thunderous, commanding pounding that rattled the expensive artwork hanging on the entryway walls. The force of the sound caused several guests near the foyer to jump and spill their champagne. The jazz music played on for a few seconds before the pianist faltered, his hands freezing over the keys. A tense silence fell over the sprawling living room. Jamal frowned, his smile melting into irritation. He set his tumbler down on the granite kitchen island with a sharp click, clearly annoyed that his perfect evening was interrupted. Probably just the building concierge complaining about the noise, Jamal muttered to his circle of banking executives, rolling his eyes. I will handle this. No one ruins my anniversary party. My mother Brenda stood nearby, clutching her diamond necklace nervously. She exchanged an uncertain glance with my father Richard, but quickly composed herself. She smoothed the skirt of her designer dress, preparing to stand behind her wealthy son-in-law as he dressed down whatever employee had dared to knock. Jamal marched across the imported rugs and yanked the heavy mahogany doors open, a condescending reprimand already forming on his lips. But the words died in his throat. Standing in the carpeted hallway was not a timid concierge or a complaining neighbor. It was a line of federal agents wearing dark tactical vests with gold lettering, accompanied by two uniformed Chicago police officers. At the front of the group stood Agent Davis, his expression hard and completely devoid of sympathy. He held a thick folder of legal documents in his left hand. Jamal took a physical step backward, his typical arrogance momentarily replaced by sheer shock. "Excuse me," Jamal stammered, his booming voice suddenly sounding very small. "What is the meaning of this? You cannot just barge into a private residence. This is a secure building." Agent Davis did not ask for permission to enter. He stepped over the threshold, dominating the opulent foyer. The other agents filed in behind him, fanning out with clinical efficiency. They did not draw weapons, but the sheer weight of their authority sucked the air out of the room. The remaining guests backed away against the floor-to-ceiling windows, their eyes wide with morbid fascination and rising panic. "We are executing a federal warrant," Agent Davis announced, his voice carrying clearly across the silent penthouse. He did not look at Jamal. His sharp gaze swept the room, scanning the crowd until it landed exactly on his target. He walked straight past the frozen bankers and the trembling socialites, stopping a few feet away from the kitchen island. "Brenda," Agent Davis said, stating her full legal name with chilling precision. "You are hereby served with a federal warrant for your arrest." My mother froze. The color drained completely from her face, leaving her looking hollow and suddenly very old. Her hand trembled as it dropped from her diamond necklace. The surrounding guests gasped in unison. A wealthy real estate developer whispered something to his wife, pulling her toward the exit. Stephanie, standing near the balcony, let out a sharp, terrified shriek and covered her mouth. "What are you talking about?" my mother whispered. "There must be a mistake. I am a respectable woman. We are hosting a party." "There is no mistake," Agent Davis replied, his tone absolutely flat. "You are being charged with severe violations of federal law, specifically interstate wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. We secured extensive documentation proving you forged a legal power of attorney document to gain unauthorized access to a private institution. Furthermore, we executed a federal freeze order on all your bank accounts effective immediately." The words echoed through the penthouse. Wire fraud, identity theft, federal freeze order. The sophisticated facade my family spent years constructing shattered into irreparable pieces in front of the audience they cared about most. The banking executives Jamal had spent all night impressing were staring at his mother-in-law as if she were a dangerous criminal, which she was. "My father," Richard stepped forward, his hands raised in a weak, placating gesture. "Officer, please," he begged, his voice trembling with cowardice. "This is just a family misunderstanding. We can clear this up quietly. There is no need to do this here in front of everyone." Agent Davis turned his steely gaze to my father. This ceased to be a family misunderstanding the moment fraudulent documents were presented to a federally insured bank to facilitate the theft of $150,000. He stated coldly. Step back, sir, unless you wish to be investigated as an accomplice. Richard scrambled backward instantly, preserving his own safety rather than defending his wife. An agent stepped forward with heavy steel handcuffs. The metallic clink sounded incredibly loud in the silent room. Please place your hands behind your back, the agent instructed my mother. The grim reality of the situation pierced through my mother's delusion. She was not going to talk her way out of this. Panic and raw, unadulterated fury finally overtook her. As the agent reached for her wrists, Brenda violently jerked her arms away. She pointed a shaking manicured finger directly at the open doorway, her face contorted into a mask of pure hatred. This is Naomi, my mother screamed, her voice cracking hysterically as it echoed off the glass walls. That psychotic, jealous daughter of mine is doing this. She is framing me. She has always been insane. She is trying to destroy our beautiful family because she is a bitter, lonely failure. You have to arrest her, not me. She is setting me up. The piercing shriek of my mother echoing through the luxury penthouse finally broke the paralysis holding Jamal in place. The initial shock of seeing federal agents in his living room dissolved into defensive indignation. He stepped directly between Agent Davis and my trembling mother, smoothing the lapels of his tailored suit. He squared his shoulders, utilizing his towering height and the inherent arrogance of a man accustomed to absolute authority. Gentlemen, I believe we need to take a massive step back right now. Jamal stated, his voice booming with the practiced cadence of a corporate executive used to giving orders. He gestured dismissively at the handcuffs the junior agent was holding. I am the director of a major financial institution in this city. I deal with wire authorizations and compliance regulations every single day. What you are currently doing is barging into a private gathering based on a completely fabricated domestic dispute. Agent Davis did not flinch, his gaze remaining locked on my mother. The evidence we possess is not based on a domestic dispute, Agent Davis replied evenly. It is based on forensic banking records. Jamal let out a sharp, condescending laugh, shaking his head, as if dealing with an incompetent teller at his branch. You are operating on false pretenses fed to you by a disturbed individual, Jamal countered, taking another step forward. My mother-in-law is a respected member of this community. My family has deep roots in Chicago real estate and banking. Do you honestly believe a woman of her standing would resort to petty theft? If you proceed with this public humiliation, I will personally ensure my legal team holds your department accountable for harassment. I strongly suggest you put those restraints away before you ruin your own careers. Sensing the hesitation in the room as Jamal invoked his corporate power, my mother immediately seized the opportunity to change the narrative. The venomous rage vanished entirely. In its place, she summoned a masterful performance of maternal heartbreak. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over her carefully applied makeup as she collapsed against my father's chest. She began to sob, her shoulders heaving with manufactured distress. "Oh, Richard," she wailed, burying her face in his jacket. "I cannot believe she is doing this to us again." She turned her tear-stained face toward Agent Davis, pressing a trembling hand to her lips. "Officer, you have to understand my daughter Naomi is very unwell. She has a documented history of severe mental breakdowns." Agent Davis narrowed his eyes, listening closely. "She has been incredibly unstable for years," my mother continued, her voice hitching with a perfectly timed sob. "She gave us that money voluntarily. She knew Stephanie and Jamal were celebrating their anniversary, and she offered the funds as a gift because she felt guilty for missing family events. She signed the paperwork herself and told me to handle the transfer because she was too busy with her job. But she gets these terrible paranoid episodes where she rewrites reality out of sheer jealousy. She has always been bitterly envious of her younger sister's happiness. Now she is weaponizing the legal system to punish us because we asked her to get psychological help. You are being manipulated by a deeply sick woman." My father, ever the spineless enabler, wrapped his arms tightly around my mother, nodding earnestly at the federal agents. "It is the tragic truth," Officer Richard lied, his voice dropping into a solemn register. "Naomi has never been quite right in the head. We have tried for years to get her the psychiatric care she desperately needs. We thought she was finally turning a corner when she generously offered to help fund Stephanie's anniversary gift. This sudden reversal, this outrageous accusation of fraud, it is just another one of her manic episodes. We are victims of her instability, not criminals." Stephanie rushed forward to join the united front of deception. She stood beside Jamal, wiping away her own fake tears. "My sister has always hated me." Stephanie sniffled, looking up at the officers with wide, innocent eyes. "She cannot stand that I am happily married while she is alone. She specifically told my mother to buy the car for me. She forced the money into our hands, claiming she wanted to make amends for being an absent sister. And now she is trying to send our mother to prison on our anniversary. It is completely twisted. You cannot arrest an innocent woman just because her daughter is having a psychotic break." The unified wall of lies hung heavy in the stifling air of the penthouse. The remaining party guests murmured among themselves, their wealthy sympathies shifting toward the weeping mother and the supposedly generous father dealing with a deranged child. Jamal firmly crossed his arms, his imposing posture radiating victorious, unchecked arrogance. He looked at Agent Davis with a superior smirk, fully believing his corporate intimidation and his family's theatrical gaslighting had successfully derailed a federal investigation. Agent Davis stood silent, his eyes darting between the weeping women and the aggressive bank director. He silently signaled for his junior agents to lower the heavy steel handcuffs. In the eyes of the law, conflicting narratives involving claims of authorized gifting and severe mental health crises required careful navigation to avoid wrongful arrests and subsequent lawsuits. Agent Davis looked down at the thick folder of financial evidence in his hands, then stared back at the matriarch. "Mrs. Brenda Agent Davis," finally said, his tone deliberately unreadable. "Given the conflicting statements presented here tonight and the introduction of verbal authorization claims, we will temporarily step back to review the specific notary logs and interview the clerk in question. But make no mistake, this investigation is far from over. Do not attempt to leave the city." Jamal smiled a triumphant, chilling smile, pulling Stephanie close as the federal agents exited the penthouse, leaving the family alone to bask in a deeply flawed and entirely false sense of complete victory. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind Agent Davis and his team. The silence that followed in the penthouse was thick and suffocating. The remaining guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, whispering among themselves as they gathered their coats and moved swiftly toward the private elevators. Jamal did not attempt to stop them. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. The veins in his neck stood out as he stared at the spot where the agents had been standing. He turned to my mother, who was wiping away her fake tears and straightening her ruined designer dress. My father was pouring himself a stiff drink at the wet bar, his hands trembling slightly against the crystal glass. Stephanie paced the floor, complaining loudly about how her party was completely destroyed by her jealous sister. Jamal silenced them all by raising a single hand. He unbuttoned his suit jacket and reached into his pocket, pulling out his smartphone. His eyes burned with a dark, vengeful energy as he scrolled through his contacts. He was not just embarrassed. He was insulted that someone of my social standing dared to challenge his kingdom. He pressed my name and hit the speakerphone button, tossing the device onto the granite kitchen island so the entire family could participate in my destruction. I was sitting in my dark living room, staring out the window at the distant city skyline. I had calculated the travel time and the likely duration of the raid. When my phone illuminated on the coffee table, breaking the pitch-black room with a harsh white glow, I knew exactly who was calling. The caller identification displayed Jamal's name in bold letters. I did not feel fear. I felt a profound sense of anticipation. I reached out, picked up the device, and swiped my thumb across the screen to accept the call. Before bringing the phone to my ear, I deliberately pressed the digital record button located on my screen interface. A small red dot appeared, signaling that every word spoken from this moment forward was being captured and saved to a secure cloud server. I lifted the phone, keeping my breathing slow and steady. I did not offer a greeting. I simply waited in the silence, letting the tension build across the cellular connection. The ambient noise of the penthouse filtered through the speaker. I could hear Stephanie complaining in the background and the sharp clinking of ice in my father's glass. Naomi Jamal barked, his voice booming with arrogant authority. I know you are there. I know you can hear me. Listen to me very carefully, because I am only going to say this once. You have made a massive mistake tonight. You thought you could send federal agents into my home, ruin my anniversary party, and humiliate my family in front of the most powerful banking executives in Chicago. You thought you were clever with your little financial spreadsheets and your pathetic attempt to frame your own mother for fraud. His breathing was heavy, fueled by unchecked rage and the false confidence he had gained from temporarily deterring the federal agents. Let me explain exactly how the real world works for people like you, Jamal continued, his tone dripping with absolute contempt. I run a major bank. I have a team of ruthless corporate lawyers on retainer who eat cases like this for breakfast. They will tie you up in endless, punishing litigation for the rest of your miserable life. My mother chimed in, her voice shrill and echoing through the speakerphone. You are sick, Naomi. You need psychiatric help. We told the police everything about your delusions. Stephanie added, her own venom shouting from across the kitchen island. You are just jealous because I have a husband who loves me and a brand new car while you have absolutely nothing. Jamal cleared his throat, silencing his wife and mother-in-law. He leaned closer to the phone, delivering his final brutal ultimatum. If you do not call those federal agents by tomorrow morning and drop this entire psychotic investigation, I will crush you. I will sue you for gross defamation. I will personally ensure you lose your accounting license, and I will have you thrown in federal prison for filing false police reports. You have until 8 o'clock tomorrow morning to retract every single lie you told them. I sat in the darkness of my apartment, letting his threats wash over me. The sheer arrogance of his lengthy monologue was absolutely beautiful. He had just provided me with a pristine, high-definition audio recording of witness intimidation, extortion, and a coordinated conspiracy to obstruct a federal investigation. He had handed me the exact weapon I needed to permanently destroy his banking career, bankrupt his false lifestyle, and ensure my mother received a maximum prison sentence without any chance of early parole. I did not raise my voice in anger. I did not defend my mental health or argue about the forged legal documents. I simply let the heavy silence stretch out for 3 long seconds, allowing the incredible weight of his threats to settle permanently into the recorded audio file. I hope you enjoy your new car, Stephanie, I said, my voice perfectly smooth and chillingly calm in the quiet room. I tapped the red button on my screen, ending the call instantly. The room plunged back into total peaceful silence. I looked down at the saved audio file, watching the upload progress bar reach 100%. The digital evidence was now completely secured in a remote server. I smiled, feeling a profound sense of satisfaction settling deep into my bones. Jamal thought he had backed me into a corner with his powerful corporate lawyers and his aggressive intimidation tactics. He had absolutely no idea that he had just handed me the heavy shovel I would use to dig his professional grave, bury his reputation, and leave his entire family begging for a mercy I would never give. The morning sunlight filtering through the blinds of my apartment brought no warmth, only the cold reality of the war my family had declared. Jamal was not a man who made empty threats. He was a predator who used his corporate status to crush anyone who dared to challenge his authority. When I arrived at the high-rise building of my accounting firm at 8 o'clock, the atmosphere on the executive floor felt noticeably different. Whispers ceased the moment I stepped out of the elevator. Colleagues who normally greeted me with warm smiles suddenly found reasons to look down at their phones or shuffle papers on their desks. The chill in the air was unmistakable, and I knew exactly who had orchestrated it. Jamal had made good on the ultimatum he delivered over the phone the previous night. Using his extensive network within the Chicago financial sector, he bypassed my direct supervisors and placed a call directly to the senior managing partners of my firm. As a prominent bank director, His word carried dangerous weight. He spun a masterful, malicious narrative, claiming that he was calling out of deep professional concern for the firm liability. He told the partners that I was suffering from a severe undocumented psychiatric breakdown. He alleged that I was currently attempting to extort my own mother, forging financial documents to frame her for wire fraud, and utilizing my forensic accounting skills to construct a delusional conspiracy against his wealthy, respectable family. He painted me not as a dedicated employee, but as a massive legal risk, a ticking time bomb who was actively committing fraud and weaponizing the federal justice system to settle petty domestic grievances. While Jamal worked to systematically dismantle my professional reputation, my sister Stephanie launched a coordinated assault on my personal life. As I sat at my desk, my phone began to vibrate violently, vibrating with a relentless, punishing rhythm. The screen flooded with notifications from social media platforms and text messages from numbers I had not spoken to in years. I opened my browser and navigated to Stephanie's public profile. There, pinned to the top of her page, was a 20-minute video that was already accumulating thousands of views. Stephanie sat on the plush sofa of Jamal's penthouse, completely devoid of makeup, wearing an oversized sweater to appear small and vulnerable. Her performance was terrifyingly convincing. She sobbed directly into the camera, her hands trembling as she wiped away perfectly timed tears. She told her followers a heartbreaking story about her older sister, a woman she claimed to love deeply, but who had completely lost her grip on reality. Stephanie stared into the lens and lied with breathtaking ease. She claimed that I had voluntarily gifted our mother the money for her anniversary present, only to suffer a manic episode and demand it back by calling the federal authorities. My sister wept openly, begging her followers for prayers, while describing the sheer terror of having armed agents invade her home during a family celebration. She painted our mother, Brenda, as a saintly, selfless matriarch who was currently bedridden with shock and grief because of my toxic, greedy actions. Stephanie looked straight into the camera and said she forgave me for trying to ruin her marriage and send our innocent mother to federal prison, but that I needed serious psychiatric intervention before I destroyed anyone else. It was a masterclass in narcissistic manipulation designed to universally isolate me and secure her position as the ultimate victim. The fallout from the video was instantaneous and devastating. My phone screen lit up with a barrage of hateful messages from our extended family. Aunts, uncles, and cousins who had never bothered to ask how I was doing were suddenly experts on my supposed mental health crisis. My Aunt Patricia sent a long message calling me a disgusting, ungrateful monster who deserved to be locked away in an asylum. My cousin David texted that I was a disgrace to the family name and that he hoped I lost my job and my freedom for putting my mother through such torment. They called me greedy, bitter, and psychotic. They told me I would die completely alone because my jealousy had poisoned my soul. Not a single relative paused to ask for my side of the story. They blindly consumed the narrative that fit their comfortable worldview, eager to burn me at the stake to protect the golden child and her wealthy husband. I sat in the glow of my monitors, surrounded by the mounting evidence of their smear campaign. They wanted me to break. They wanted me to burst into tears, run out of the building, and surrender to their demands. They expected the overwhelming weight of social humiliation and professional ruin to force my submission. But they fundamentally misunderstood the person they were trying to break. The pain of their betrayal had already burned away. All that remained was cold, absolute resolve. I did not shed a single tear as I read the vicious messages. I simply took screenshots of every threat, every lie, and every attempt at character assassination, adding them to my ever-growing digital archive. Just as I captured the final vile message from my uncle, the telephone on my desk rang. It was not an external call. It was the internal line connecting directly to the executive suites on the top floor. I picked up the receiver, my voice steady and professional. "Naomi speaking," I answered. The voice on the other end belonged to the executive assistant of the senior managing partner. Miss Naomi, the assistant, said, her tone completely devoid of its usual warmth. "Mr. Harrison requires your presence in his office immediately." Please bring your security badge and any current project files you are handling. The implication was clear. They were preparing to terminate my employment and strip my access to the building. The storm Jamal promised had arrived, and I stood up to walk directly into the center of it. The elevator ride to the top floor felt like the longest journey of my professional life. The steel doors reflected my rigid posture and tight jaw. I clutched my security badge, fully prepared to be escorted out by corporate security. When the doors parted, I stepped onto the plush carpet of the executive suite. The receptionist did not offer her usual greeting. She simply pointed toward the heavy oak doors at the end of the corridor. I walked past the silent assistants, projecting an aura of calm that I did not feel. I knocked twice and entered without waiting. Mr. Harrison sat behind his massive desk. He was a formidable man in his 50s, known for his ruthless efficiency. The executive assistant stood nearby, ready to process my termination paperwork. "Leave us," Mr. Harrison instructed his assistant, his voice low and commanding. "Hold all my calls and make sure we are not interrupted." The assistant nodded and exited, closing the heavy door with a soft click. I stepped forward, preparing to place my badge on his desk. I knew Jamal had leveraged his immense banking power to paint me as an unhinged liability. I was ready to accept my dismissal and fight my family on my own time. But before I could speak, Mr. Harrison stood up. He did not ask for my badge. Instead, he walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline and pulled the heavy privacy blinds shut. The sudden dimming of the room changed the atmosphere instantly. He moved to the glass door and twisted the deadbolt, locking us inside. "Sit down, Naomi," he said, gesturing to a leather guest chair opposite his desk. I hesitated for a fraction of a second before taking a seat. He returned to his desk, leaning against the edge, crossing his arms, and studying me with a penetrating gaze. Early this morning, I received a disturbing phone call from Jamal, a director at a prominent downtown bank. Mr. Harrison began, his tone sharp. "He spent 20 minutes detailing your supposed mental breakdown. He claimed you were forging federal documents, harassing his wealthy family, and posing a catastrophic risk to this firm. He strongly suggested that if I did not terminate your employment immediately, he would use his influence to ensure our firm lost several major corporate accounts. It was a very aggressive presentation." I kept my expression perfectly neutral, refusing to show the anger bubbling beneath my calm exterior. "I apologize that my personal family matters have bled into the professional environment," I replied evenly. "I am prepared to tender my resignation to protect the firm from any retaliatory actions he might take. I will clear out my desk immediately." Mr. Harrison let out a short, sudden laugh that echoed strangely in the locked office. He shook his head, a wry smile touching the corners of his mouth. "You are not going anywhere, Naomi. I did not lock that door to fire you. I locked it because we are about to break several internal compliance protocols, and I do not want any witnesses." I stared at him, completely thrown off balance for the first time since my mother stole my life savings. "Before I transitioned to the private sector and became a managing partner here," Mr. Harrison explained, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush, "I spent 15 years working as a criminal investigator for the Internal Revenue Service. I specialized in dismantling high-net-worth fraud syndicates. I have interrogated hundreds of white-collar criminals, corrupt bankers, and narcissistic executives. I know exactly what a manipulator sounds like when they are trying to cover their tracks." Jamal did not sound like a concerned family member trying to protect our firm. He sounded like a terrified man desperately trying to neutralize a threat before she could expose him. His arrogance triggered every single federal instinct I possess. "So, Naomi, I want you to tell me exactly what your brother-in-law is hiding, and I want the absolute truth." The relief that washed over me was staggering. I was not standing alone against Jamal and his powerful connections. I had just found the most formidable ally possible. I opened my folder and laid out the facts with clinical precision. I explained the stolen $150,000, the forged power of attorney, the payoff of my sister's debt, and the purchase of the luxury car. I told him about the federal freeze orders and the warrants that were currently disrupting their perfect lives. Mr. Harrison listened intently, his eyes narrowing with sharp professional appreciation, as I detailed the forensic trail I had built. When I finished, he walked around his desk and booted up a secure standalone laptop that was not connected to our standard corporate intranet. Your brother-in-law made a fatal miscalculation when he decided to call me and throw his weight around. Mr. Harrison said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He assumed I was just another corporate suit who would bow to his wealth and influence. He forgot that forensic accountants possess the keys to the financial kingdom. Jamal used his authority to try and destroy your life. Now we are going to use my clearance to look into his. Mr. Harrison logged into a highly restricted encrypted clearinghouse network, a database typically reserved for senior partners investigating massive institutional fraud. This system bypassed standard banking privacy walls, allowing us to see the raw, unfiltered data flowing through Jamal's specific branch operations. Pull your chair around the desk, Mr. Harrison instructed, navigating the final security protocols. I moved my chair behind his desk, my eyes glued to the glowing screen. We bypassed his personal checking accounts, going straight into the commercial lending portfolios he managed and authorized. Mr. Harrison ran a specific query crossing Jamal's approved loans with the identification number of the stolen luxury car. When the results populated on screen, I gasped, realizing exactly what we had uncovered. The vehicle identification number of the brand new Porsche Macan sat glaringly in the middle of a commercial lending portfolio. Mr. Harrison leaned closer, recognizing the anomaly. Jamal had not just accepted a stolen luxury vehicle from his mother-in-law to stroke his own ego. He had weaponized that vehicle within 24 hours of its purchase. He had used his executive access at his own bank branch to originate a highly illegal off-the-books commercial loan. The Porsche, registered entirely in my sister Stephanie's name, was listed as the primary collateral for a short-term business line of credit. The amount was staggering. Jamal had authorized a disbursement of $250,000 to a shell company registered to a post office box in Delaware. He had bypassed standard underwriting protocols and pushed the funding through using his director-level clearance. This was not just a conflict of interest. It was a textbook violation of federal banking regulations. By using stolen property as collateral for an unauthorized commercial loan, Jamal had crossed the line from an arrogant enabler into an active participant in a federal financial crime. He thought he was untouchable. He manipulated the banking system using his wife's shiny new anniversary gift to secure the transaction. Mr. Harrison let out a low whistle, shaking his head as he highlighted the disbursement logs. Your brother-in-law is playing a dangerous game. He is leveraging assets he does not own to float phantom companies. But why would a wealthy bank director need $250,000 in unrecorded cash? It does not make any sense unless he is covering up a massive deficit somewhere else. That question hung in the air, heavy with implication. I grabbed the mouse, my fingers flying across the desk, as I initiated a deeper dive into their household finances. If Jamal was desperate enough to commit bank fraud to generate liquid cash, there had to be a hemorrhage somewhere in his personal ledger. I focused entirely on the secondary credit networks. I started looking for unsecured debts, peer-to-peer lending platforms, and high-yield personal loans. The software churned through the encrypted data, pulling queries from national credit registries. The screen flooded with red warning flags. It was a massacre. Stephanie had not just accumulated $50,000 in credit card debt. That was merely the tip of a terrifying iceberg. My sister, the golden child who spent her days projecting an image of effortless luxury on social media, was drowning in a sea of toxic liabilities. I opened the detailed reports, my eyes scanning the catastrophic damage. Over the past 18 months, Stephanie had secretly taken out over $200,000 in high-interest personal loans, but she had not used her own name. She had exploited her marital status, forging Jamal's signature and utilizing his exceptional credit score to secure the funding. She had opened 6 different shadow accounts, routing the borrowed money to various digital wallets to hide the paper trail from her husband. She had systematically leveraged his pristine financial reputation to fund her designer wardrobe, her extravagant vacations, and her flawless internet persona. The $50,000 my mother had stolen from me was just a desperate last-minute patch to cover a single missed payment that threatened to expose Stephanie's massive web of lies. Jamal did not know. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. The arrogant, condescending man who had stood in the steakhouse and mocked my practical lifestyle had absolutely no idea that his own wife had secretly bankrupted him. He had married a financial parasite who was actively destroying his credit and his future behind his back. The commercial loan he had fraudulently pushed through his bank was likely a desperate attempt to cover unexplained shortfalls in their joint accounts shortfalls, created entirely by Stephanie's hidden debt. He was committing federal crimes to patch holes in a sinking ship, completely unaware that his own wife was the one drilling the holes. I sat back in my chair, the magnitude of the revelation washing over me in waves of profound, cold clarity. Jamal was not just a cruel elitist bully who delighted in my humiliation. He was a clueless victim of his own arrogance and his wife's insatiable greed. His entire life was built on a foundation of lies, a house of cards that was currently swaying in a hurricane. He had threatened to ruin my career boastfully, claiming he had a team of corporate lawyers ready to crush me. He genuinely thought that a few threatening phone calls would force me to surrender. He believed that his unearned social status gave him the ultimate authority to dictate my future and protect my mother from the consequences of her blatant thievery. But his wealth was an illusion. His wife had financially ruined him, and his desperate attempts to hide the bleeding had made him complicit in severe federal banking fraud. Mr. Harrison leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest as he processed the same devastating information. He looked at me, a grim smile on his lips. "Well, Naomi," he said quietly, the silence of the locked office amplifying the weight of his words. "It appears your brother-in-law is in no position to threaten anyone's employment. He is about to lose his banking license, his freedom, and his marriage all in one spectacular crash." I looked back at the monitors, staring at the digital graveyard of my family's fake empire. The anger that had fueled me for days dissolved, replaced by a chilling absolute certainty. They had tried to break me to maintain their perfect facade. Now I held the incontrovertible evidence required to burn that pathetic facade completely to the ground. The files displayed on those glowing monitors were the perfect weapon. I was going to use his own meticulously documented financial crimes to ensure he never threatened me again. I left Mr. Harrison in his office and walked back to my desk with a sense of absolute clarity. The rest of the workday passed in a blur of routine tasks, my mind already 10 steps ahead of the family that thought they had defeated me. When I finally returned to my apartment that evening, the air felt lighter. I checked my mailbox out of pure habit. Nestled between utility bills and supermarket flyers was a thick, heavy envelope made of expensive cream parchment. My name was written across the front in flowing professional calligraphy. I carried the mail upstairs, tossing the bills onto the kitchen counter, but holding on to the thick envelope. I broke the wax seal and pulled out an elegant gold foil invitation. The embossed lettering caught the ambient light of my living room. It was an exclusive invitation to the highly anticipated annual charity gala hosted by Jamal and his deeply connected family. This was not just a simple dinner party. It was the premier social event of the season for Chicago elite, a night where millionaires and corporate leaders gathered to showcase their wealth under the guise of philanthropy. I had received a save-the-date card months ago, back when my family still pretended to tolerate my existence. Jamal had likely forgotten to remove me from the automated mailing list his event planners managed, or perhaps he assumed my current disgrace would keep me hiding in the shadows. I opened the folded card, my eyes scanning the itinerary for the evening. The main event featured a silent auction, a keynote speech by Jamal on corporate integrity, and a special award ceremony. My gaze locked onto the second paragraph, and my blood ran completely cold. The invitation proudly announced that this year the foundation was specifically honoring my mother Brenda and my sister Stephanie. They were slated to receive a Philanthropic Achievement Award for their outstanding generosity and commitment to family values. The sheer, unadulterated hypocrisy of those printed words made my chest tight. My mother and sister were going to stand on a brightly lit stage in front of the most powerful people in the city and accept an award for generosity just days after committing federal wire fraud to steal my life savings. They were going to wear expensive gowns bought with my money and smile for the cameras playing the role of benevolent socialites. Jamal was going to present this award using his platform to solidify his image as a successful, respectable family man, all while his bank was secretly bleeding from the fraudulent loans he had authorized to cover his wife and her massive hidden debts. I walked over to my living room window, looking out at the city lights. They wanted to destroy my reputation in the dark, using whispered phone calls to my boss and tearful, manipulative videos on social media to isolate me. They wanted me to lose my job, my home, and my sanity while they basked in the glow of high society approval. But this invitation was a fatal tactical error. It was a golden ticket right into the heart of their fragile empire. A private confrontation in a lawyer office would no longer suffice. If I simply handed the evidence over to the authorities, quietly Jamal would use his expensive legal team to spin the narrative. My mother would play the victim, and Stephanie would cry her way out of accountability. They would find a way to sweep the financial devastation under the rug to protect their social standing. I realized in that quiet moment that I did not just need to expose them. I needed to do it on the largest, most public stage possible. I needed to dismantle their lies in front of the very audience they had sacrificed my future to impress. This charity gala was the perfect stage. It was a room filled with Jamal and his banking board members, federal regulators, investors, and the elite circle that dictated their social currency. The invitation in my hand was a Trojan horse granting me direct access behind their fortified walls. I placed the gold foil card carefully on the kitchen counter. I had 3 days to prepare for the gala. The next afternoon, during my lunch break, I took a cab to the high-end shopping district on Michigan Avenue. If I was going to crash their perfect evening, I was not going to do it quietly. I walked into an exclusive boutique and bypassed the safe, neutral colors I usually wore to corporate events. I found exactly what I was looking for. It was a breathtaking floor-length crimson gown. The color was bold, unapologetic, and impossible to ignore. It was the color of a warning. I purchased the dress without a second thought, treating it as the psychological armor I would need to walk into a room full of people who had been fed vicious lies about my mental stability. When I returned to my apartment that night, I sat down at my personal computer to prepare the actual weapon. I took a brand new encrypted USB drive from its packaging. I opened the secure file containing the forensic dossier Mr. Harrison and I had built. I transferred the high-resolution image of the forged power of attorney document, the digital wire logs tracing the stolen $150,000, and the security camera still shots from the bank branch. But I did not stop there. I added the explosive commercial lending documents proving Jamal and his unauthorized use of the stolen Porsche as collateral. I included the comprehensive credit reports detailing the $200,000 in secret high-interest loans Stephanie had fraudulently opened under his name. I organized the files into a seamless, high-definition slideshow presentation. I safely ejected the encrypted USB drive holding the small metal device in the palm of my hand. It contained the absolute destruction of their entire world. I smiled. The evening of the charity gala arrived with a sharp, biting wind that swept off the lake. I slipped the encrypted flash drive into my clutch purse, securing the magnetic clasp with a satisfying snap. I stepped into my crimson gown, the heavy silk falling perfectly around my frame. It felt like armor. I did not bother with extravagant jewelry or elaborate hairstyles. The color of the dress was a statement all on its own. I walked out and climbed into the waiting black car, giving the driver the address of the ultra-exclusive country club in the northern suburbs. The drive took 45 minutes, giving me time to review my digital presentation. When the car pulled into the winding tree-lined driveway of the country club, the sheer scale of the event became apparent. Valets in crisp uniforms rushed to open doors for arriving guests. Expensive sports cars and luxury sedans lined the circular entrance. I stepped out of the vehicle, the cold wind catching the hem of my dress. I handed my keys to the valet and walked up the wide stone steps toward the grand double doors. The interior of the country club was a masterclass in aggressive opulence. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, casting a warm golden glow over the polished marble floors. A string quartet played softly in the corner of the grand foyer, providing an elegant backdrop to the low murmur of wealthy conversations. I handed my long wool coat to the attendant at the cloakroom, revealing the striking crimson gown. I took a slow, deliberate breath, squaring my shoulders, and turned to face the main ballroom. The moment I crossed the threshold, the atmosphere shifted. It was not a sudden silence, but a localized ripple of disruption. The guests closest to the entrance turned their heads, their polite smiles faltering as they recognized me. These were my aunts, uncles, and cousins, the very people who had flooded my phone with hateful, vicious messages just days prior. They had consumed Stephanie's tearful social media videos and Jamal's character assassination without a single question. Now the supposed mental patient had walked right into their prestigious sanctuary. The whispers started immediately. I could see my aunt leaning in to mutter something to my cousin, their eyes darting toward me with a mixture of morbid curiosity and outright disgust. I heard fragments of their harsh judgments floating over the classical music. They called me unhinged, dangerous, and deeply jealous. They expected me to look broken, disheveled, and manic. Instead, I stood tall in my striking red dress, making direct, unflinching eye contact with every relative who dared to glare at me. One by one, they looked away, unable to match my cold, absolute certainty. I navigated through the sea of tailored tuxedos and designer evening wear, my eyes scanning the massive ballroom for my primary targets. I found them holding court near the center of the room, standing beside a towering display of white orchids. Brenda and Stephanie were in their element. They held delicate crystal flutes of champagne, throwing their heads back in synchronized musical laughter as they entertained a circle of elite socialites and prominent banking executives. My mother wore a shimmering silver gown that caught the chandelier light with every movement. But it was the jewelry that made my stomach turn into a tight, heavy knot. Resting against her collarbone was a thick, dazzling diamond necklace. Stephanie mirrored her with matching diamond teardrop earrings sparkling as she nodded eagerly at something an executive said. They were draped in precious stones, projecting an image of generational wealth and philanthropic grace. I knew with absolute sickening clarity that those diamonds were purchased with the stolen remnants of my savings account. They were literally wearing my stolen house fund around their necks to impress Jamal's wealthy colleagues. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. They had forged federal documents, drained my life savings, triggered a federal investigation, and then simply gone shopping for high-end jewelry to wear to a charity event. They felt entirely invincible. I watched Jamal approach the group, wrapping a possessive arm around Stephanie's waist. He leaned in and kissed her cheek, smiling broadly at the executives. He looked like the perfect, successful husband, completely unaware that his wife had secretly plunged him into massive high-interest debt, and that his banking license was currently hanging by a very thin thread. I continued my slow, deliberate path across the room, moving closer to the stage where the audiovisual equipment was positioned. I needed to map out the exact route to the control booth. But before I could reach the perimeter of the dance floor, a heavy hand grabbed my elbow, pulling me sharply into a secluded alcove near the secondary coat check. I turned to find my father, Richard. His face was pale, glistening with a thin layer of anxious sweat. His tuxedo looked slightly rumpled, betraying the immense stress he was hiding from the public. He had seen me enter, and panic had entirely consumed him. He cornered me against the dark oak paneling, looking over his shoulder frantically to ensure none of Jamal's banking colleagues were watching us. "Naomi, what are you doing here?" he hissed, his voice trembling with a pathetic mixture of fear and anger. "You need to leave right now before your mother sees you." I looked down at his hand, still gripping my arm. "Let go of me," I commanded quietly, my tone leaving absolutely zero room for negotiation. He dropped his hand as if I had burned him, but he did not step back. "You cannot be here," he pleaded, his breathing ragged. "Jamal is furious. Your mother is a nervous wreck. We are trying to keep this family together, and you showing up like this is only making things worse. Please, Naomi, I am begging you, just turn around now, walk out those heavy doors, and stop embarrassing us in front of these people." I stared at my father, taking in the full measure of his pathetic, trembling frame. He was not asking me to leave for my own safety. He was asking me to disappear so he could continue living comfortably inside a massive, highly illegal lie. I did not have the chance to formulate a response before a large shadow fell across the polished wood of the alcove. Jamal had spotted us. He broke away from his circle of elite banking executives and marched directly toward the coat check area, his face thunderous and tight with suppressed rage. He was not alone. Flanking him on either side were two massive country club security guards, their earpieces spiraled tightly against their necks, hands resting on their utility belts. Jamal moved with the aggressive, entitled stride of a man who believed he owned the entire building. He stopped inches from me, invading my personal space in a deliberate attempt to intimidate me into submission. He looked me up and down, his lips curling into a sneer of absolute disgust. "I thought I made myself perfectly clear on the phone," Naomi. Jamal spat, keeping his voice dangerously low so the nearby socialites would not hear the venom in his tone. "You are not welcome here. You are not part of this family, and you are certainly not part of this event. Your presence is a massive liability, and I will not allow your pathetic, unstable jealousy to ruin a night dedicated to celebrating my wife and my mother-in-law." He turned to the two security guards, snapping his fingers in a sharp, degrading motion. "Gentlemen, this woman is an uninvited guest. She has a documented history of severe mental instability, and she is currently harassing my family. I want her physically removed from the premises immediately. Escort her out to the street and ensure she does not set foot on this property again. If she resists, you have my full authorization to contact local law enforcement and have her arrested for criminal trespassing." My father shrank back against the wall, utterly terrified by Jamal and his ruthless display of power. Richard looked at me with pleading eyes, silently begging me to submit to the humiliation and walk away quietly. I did not flinch. I did not step back, and I certainly did not lower my gaze. I maintained absolute, unbroken eye contact with Jamal as the two large security guards stepped forward, reaching out to grab my arms. Before their hands could make contact with the silk of my crimson gown, I calmly raised my right hand. "Stop right there," I instructed the guards, my voice projecting a level of cold clinical authority that made them pause. I slowly reached into my clutch purse. Jamal scoffed, shaking his head at my apparent defiance. "You have 3 seconds to walk out that door voluntarily, Naomi," Jamal warned, leaning closer. But I ignored him entirely. I pulled a thick, folded piece of heavy legal paper from my purse and snapped it open. I held it out directly to the senior security guard. "This is a federal non-interference order," I stated clearly, ensuring every word landed with heavy, undeniable weight. "It is signed by a federal judge and executed by the United States Department of Justice. It officially prohibits any individual, including you, from obstructing, detaining, or interfering with my movements, while a highly sensitive federal investigation is actively unfolding." The senior guard frowned, taking the document from my hand. He scanned the embossed federal seal, the bold legal phrasing, and the unmistakable signature of a sitting federal judge. The color rapidly drained from his face. He recognized immediately that this was not a simple domestic dispute or a country club trespassing issue. This was federal jurisdiction, and violating that order meant risking his own freedom. The guard swallowed hard, taking a deliberate step backward and signaling for his partner to do the same. "We cannot touch her, sir," the guard mumbled to Jamal, handing the document back to me with a respectful nod. "This is a federal mandate. Our hands are completely tied." Jamal stared at the guard in absolute disbelief. His jaw tightened so hard, I thought his teeth might shatter. He looked at the document in my hand, the reality of his own powerlessness finally piercing through his suffocating arrogance. He opened his mouth to argue, to demand they throw me out regardless of the law, but a sharp voice called out from the ballroom. An event organizer holding a clipboard and looking frantic rushed over. "Mr. Jamal," she gasped. "It is time. They are waiting for your keynote speech on corporate integrity and family values. We need you at the podium right now." Jamal closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, his chest heaving as he fought to suppress a violent outburst. He was trapped. He could not cause a massive public scene with federal implications while hundreds of banking executives and elite socialites waited for his grand philanthropic speech. He turned his furious gaze back to me, his eyes promising absolute retribution. "This is not over," he hissed, his breath hot against my face. "When I am done speaking, I am going to destroy you." He spun on his heel, adjusting his tuxedo jacket with sharp, angry jerks, and marched aggressively toward the brightly lit stage at the center of the ballroom. My father let out a shaky breath, sliding along the wall to escape back into the crowd. I stood alone in the alcove, watching Jamal ascend the steps to the podium, a fake, charming smile plastering itself across his face as the audience erupted into applause. He tapped the microphone, ready to deliver his sermon. The room was focused on him, captivated by his performance. It was the perfect distraction. I turned my back to the crowd, slipped into the shadows along the perimeter of the ballroom, and made my way silently toward the audiovisual control booth. I moved through the service corridor. The ambient noise of polite applause faded as I reached the heavy door marked audiovisual control. I turned the brass handle and stepped inside the cramped space. A single technician sat bathed in the glow of multiple monitors, wearing thick headphones and tapping his foot. I approached him silently, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. He jumped, yanking his headphones down. Before he could ask who I was, I handed him a crisp $100 bill and flashed an authoritative smile. I told him the event coordinator needed him in the main foyer immediately for a VIP arrival, and that I was the emergency backup sent to cue the tribute video. He pocketed the cash, thanked me, and hurried out the door. The moment his footsteps faded down the corridor, I turned the heavy deadbolt on the control booth door, securing myself inside. Through the wide observation window, I had a perfect view of the stage. Jamal stood at the mahogany podium, basking in the attention of Chicago's financial elite. His voice boomed through the sound system, rich with charisma and dripping with absolute hypocrisy. He spoke eloquently about corporate integrity, weaving a masterful narrative about the ethical responsibilities of wealth and the profound importance of family values. He gestured broadly, captivating the audience of banking executives, real estate tycoons, and federal regulators who controlled his destiny. It was a flawless performance, delivered by a man completely unaware his stage was about to become a scaffold. And now Jamal continued, his tone shifting into a warm register. "It is my distinct honor to recognize two women who embody the true spirit of philanthropic grace. They are the bedrock of our family and a shining example of selfless generosity. Please join me in welcoming my beautiful wife, Stephanie, and my incredible mother-in-law, Brenda." The ballroom erupted into thunderous applause. From my vantage point in the darkened booth, I watched my mother and sister glide up the carpeted stairs. They stepped into the spotlight, their smiles wide and perfectly rehearsed. The diamond necklace around my mother's throat caught the stage lights, glittering with the stolen remnants of my future. Stephanie linked her arm through Jamal's, waving modestly to the admiring crowd. They were at the absolute pinnacle of their social climbing, intoxicated by the validation of the elite. Jamal raised a hand to quiet the room, his smile pride. As a testament to their unwavering commitment, we have prepared a short presentation outlining their charitable contributions over the past year, Jamal announced. "If we could please dim the house lights and direct your attention to the main screen." The chandeliers above the ballroom floor gradually darkened, plunging the audience into a hushed twilight. A massive motorized projector screen descended slowly from the ceiling directly behind the stage, unfurling like a pristine white canvas. This was the moment. I pulled the encrypted flash drive from my clutch purse, the cool metal smooth against my fingertips. I plugged it directly into the primary presentation terminal, ignoring the folder labeled Gala Tribute Video. I opened my own master file, maximized the presentation window, and pressed the execute key. The massive screen illuminated, casting a harsh, glaring white light across the stage and over the faces of my family. It did not play a heartwarming montage of charitable events or staged volunteer work. Instead, a towering, high-definition image of the forged power of attorney document filled the entire screen. The legal text was magnified to an inescapable size. I pressed the forward arrow and a bright red circle highlighted the fraudulent signature at the bottom of the page, alongside a side-by-side comparison of my actual verified signature. The ballroom fell into a sudden, suffocating silence. The transition was so jarring the string quartet stopped playing mid-note. I hit the next button. The screen transitioned to the digital wire transfer logs, the red arrows clearly tracking the movement of $150,000 from my personal savings account directly into my parents' joint checking account. I advanced the presentation again. The screen flashed a crystal clear, time-stamped security camera photograph obtained from the bank branch. It showed my mother Brenda standing at the teller window sliding the forged documents across the counter. Her face was captured in undeniable clarity, caught in the exact moment she committed federal wire fraud. The dead silence in the room stretched until it felt like the air itself was cracking. Then the whispers began. They did not start as a polite murmur, but as a rapid, horrified buzz rippling through the tables of banking executives and legal professionals who instantly recognized the severe criminality displayed on the screen. The evidence was irrefutable, stark, and entirely devastating. On the stage, the transformation was instantaneous and catastrophic. Jamal turned around to look at the screen, expecting a flattering tribute to his family. When his eyes locked onto the massive image of his mother-in-law executing a federal banking crime, all the blood drained completely from his face. He turned a ghastly shade of white, his arrogant posture collapsing into sheer panic. He realized in a fraction of a second his entire professional network was currently viewing indisputable evidence of felony fraud connected directly to his household. "Cut the feed!" Jamal screamed, his voice cracking hysterically over the live microphone as he pointed a shaking finger toward the back of the room. "Cut the power right now. Security, get in that booth and turn it off. Turn it off." I stood very calmly in the dark, watching the absolute chaos detonate below me. Two security guards sprinted down the service corridor and slammed their heavy shoulders against the door of the audio-visual room. The brass handle rattled violently, but the heavy steel deadbolt held firm. I leaned against the control console, my hand resting gently on the keyboard, fully prepared to deliver the final fatal blow to his ruined empire. The heavy steel door rattled violently behind me as the security guards threw their combined weight against the frame. I ignored the deafening thuds and focused entirely on the sleek audio mixing console positioned in front of me. I quickly located the master channel for the public address system, ensuring the volume sliders were pushed to their absolute maximum limit. I leaned very close to the silver microphone stationed on the wooden desk, firmly pressing the glowing green activation button. My voice boomed through the massive overhead speakers, filling every single corner of the grand ballroom with absolute undeniable clarity. "Good evening to all the esteemed guests, honorable board members, and federal regulators in attendance." I began, keeping my tone completely calm and conversational over the powerful sound system. "Please forgive the sudden change in our scheduled programming. My name is Naomi. I am the biological daughter of the woman currently standing on your stage and the older sister of the woman standing right beside her. You were invited here tonight to celebrate their incredible philanthropic generosity and their deep commitment to family values. However, it is vitally important to truly understand exactly how they actually fund that extraordinary generosity." Down below on the ballroom floor, the massive crowd remained completely frozen in a state of collective shock. Jamal was frantically gesturing at the technical staff near the stage, his face transforming into a mask of sweating, unadulterated terror. My mother stood completely paralyzed under the bright spotlight, her shaking hands covering her mouth, as the projected image of her federal banking crime loomed massively behind her. Stephanie looked around the room like a trapped animal, desperately trying to shrink away from the blinding glare of public scrutiny and the countless judging eyes of the wealthy elite socialites watching her. I pressed the forward arrow on my computer keyboard. The giant screen transitioned from the forged banking documents to a new, highly detailed financial dossier. The sparkling diamond necklace my mother is wearing tonight, and the luxury vehicle my sister presented as a grand anniversary gift, were not purchased with their own money. My voice echoed into the silent room. They were purchased with my entire life savings. My mother forged a legal document, committed identity theft, and initiated a fraudulent wire transfer to deliberately steal $150,000 from me entirely on her own selfish accord. A collective horrified gasp rippled through the vast audience. I could clearly see the prominent banking executives whispering furiously to one another in absolute disbelief. But I was not quite finished yet. I had promised myself to burn their entire house of cards completely to the ground, and it was finally time to address the beloved golden child of the family. But the miserable deception does not stop with my mother, I continued smoothly, hitting the next key on the console. The massive screen flashed instantly to a compiled credit report pulled directly from the most secure national financial databases. The bright red warning flags and outstanding balance figures were magnified significantly for everyone in the room to easily see. My sister Stephanie projects a daily life of effortless wealth and perfection. The actual truth is quite different. Over the past 18 months, Stephanie has secretly taken out over $200,000 in high-interest personal loans. She did not use her own name. She forged her husband's signature and utilized his pristine credit rating to secure the massive funding. She opened untraceable shadow accounts to deliberately hide the massive toxic debt from him while funding her designer wardrobe. I watched Jamal through the thick glass observation window. The blood that had drained from his face when my mother's crimes were exposed seemed to freeze entirely in his veins. He turned his head slowly, his wide eyes locking directly onto his wife. Stephanie was shaking her head back and forth, her face terribly pale and heavily streaked with dark tears, pleading silently with him to stop looking at her. But the detailed financial reports blazing on the screen directly behind her offered absolutely zero room for denial. The exact account numbers and forged digital signatures were laid out perfectly. And finally, I said, my voice dropping a full octave to deliver the fatal, crushing blow. I pressed the forward arrow one last time. The screen immediately shifted to display internal, highly restricted commercial lending documents from Jamal's own downtown bank branch. We arrive at the man of the hour. Jamal loves to speak endlessly about corporate integrity. Yet when his mother-in-law presented his wife with a stolen luxury vehicle, Jamal immediately utilized his high executive access to originate a completely off-the-books commercial loan. He intentionally bypassed all standard underwriting protocols for his own personal gain. He authorized a massive disbursement of $250,000 to a fake shell company, and he used that stolen car registered entirely in his wife's name as the primary collateral for this highly illegal transaction. The ballroom descended instantly into pure, unadulterated chaos. The polite, hushed whispers of the elite crowd transformed wildly into an explosive uproar of furious shouting and panicked physical movement. The prestigious board members of Jamal's financial institution were standing up quickly from their elegant tables, their faces severely contorted with undeniable rage, shock, and deep disbelief at the crimes they just witnessed. They were witnessing their own branch director being exposed for catastrophic federal banking violations on a massive, undeniable scale. Investors who had trusted Jamal with millions were loudly demanding answers, their angry voices joining the loud cacophony of the panicked socialites. On the grand stage, the perfect family had completely disintegrated. Jamal looked at Stephanie with pure, unadulterated horror. The realization that his own wife had secretly bankrupted him, and that his desperate illegal attempts to cover the financial bleeding had just been broadcast to his entire professional network, shattered him completely. He took a staggering step away from her. The heavy steel door of the audiovisual booth finally gave way with a deafening crash, the metal frame buckling under the sheer force of the country club security guards. They rushed into the small room, breathing heavily and looking completely frantic. But their arrival was irrelevant now. The damage was permanently done. I stepped away from the microphone and the control console raising my hands in a calm gesture as they flanked me. Through the thick observation window, the destruction of my family continued to unfold on the grand stage. The elite audience was completely unmoored, shouting and pointing at the glowing screen. And then the atmosphere in the sprawling ballroom shifted once again. The massive floor-to-ceiling windows lining the eastern wall of the country club suddenly illuminated with a frantic, pulsating rhythm. Brilliant flashes of piercing red and vibrant blue light cut through the opulent darkness. The strobe effect painted the crystal chandeliers and the terrified faces of the guests in harsh, alternating colors. The visual warning was unmistakable. The authorities had arrived. I smiled softly. Mr. Harrison and I timed our federal tip perfectly. The grand finale was beginning. The heavy oak double doors at the main entrance of the grand ballroom were shoved violently apart, slamming against the interior walls with a resonant boom that silenced the panicked crowd. A highly coordinated team of federal agents and local police officers poured into the venue. They moved with clinical efficiency. Their dark tactical vests and severe expressions stood in stark contrast to the tailored tuxedos, flowing silk gowns, and delicate white orchids decorating the room. The only sound was the heavy synchronized thud of combat boots marching across the polished marble floors. Agent Davis led the formation, his sharp eyes scanning the sea of elite socialites until he locked onto the brightly lit stage. He did not pause to address the bewildered country club management or the shouting investors. He marched straight down the center aisle, parting the crowd of Chicago high society. The guests shrank back, pulling their expensive garments out of the way, their morbid curiosity keeping them glued to the spectacle. On the stage, my mother realized exactly what was happening. The manufactured grace and elegant posture she had spent decades cultivating vanished in an instant. Brenda staggered backward, her high heels catching on the carpeted platform as she bumped into the wooden podium. She looked like a trapped animal, her eyes wide and wild with dawning comprehension. The federal agents surrounded the stage, cutting off any possible avenue of escape. Agent Davis stepped onto the platform, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. "Brenda," he announced, his voice projecting clearly over the stunned silence. "You are under arrest for interstate wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. You have the right to remain silent." My mother did not choose to remain silent. She completely lost her mind. As Agent Davis reached for her wrist, Brenda let out a piercing, hysterical shriek that echoed painfully through the cavernous ballroom. She began to thrash violently, her arms flailing in a desperate attempt to evade the officers. "No," she screamed. "This is a mistake! Get your hands off me!" The physical altercation was brief, but incredibly shocking to witness. Two additional agents stepped up to assist, grabbing my mother by the arms. She kicked and writhed, her expensive silver haute couture gown twisting and riding up her legs as she fought against the inevitable. The sparkling diamond necklace purchased with the stolen remnants of my life savings slipped from her collarbone and snapped, sending precious stones scattering across the stage floor. The wealthy elite, the very people my mother had sacrificed my future to impress, watched in absolute disgust as she was physically subdued. They held their phones up, recording her humiliating downfall. She was pushed face first against the podium, the cold steel cuffs clicking securely around her wrists. Her perfectly styled hair fell in tangled, messy strands across her tear-streaked face as they hauled her upright. The illusion of her superiority was completely shattered forever. While my mother was being escorted off the stage, weeping and shouting incoherent threats at the ceiling, my sister Stephanie was experiencing her own total collapse. The golden child who had spent her entire life shielded from consequences suddenly found herself standing in the epicenter of a massive federal disaster. She was trembling uncontrollably, her chest heaving with panicked, shallow breaths. The crushing weight of her secret high-interest debt and the realization that her luxurious lifestyle was permanently over paralyzed her. She looked out at the audience, seeing the faces of the socialites who had fawned over her just an hour ago. Now those same faces held nothing but contempt and judgment. The bank board members were glaring at her, recognizing her as the catalyst for the commercial fraud. Stephanie needed a shield. She desperately needed someone to stand in front of her and absorb the devastating blow. Stephanie turned her tear-filled eyes toward her husband. Jamal was standing at the edge of the stage, his breathing ragged, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. He was watching his entire banking career, his pristine social standing, and his generational wealth evaporate into thin air. He knew the federal agents would be returning for him. The evidence of his commercial loan fraud was currently blazing on the projector screen behind him. Stephanie took a stumbling step toward him, extending her shaking hands. "Jamal, please," she sobbed, her voice small and pathetic. "Please help me. Tell them you can fix it." She reached out desperately, clinging to him for protection. But Jamal did not embrace her. The realization that this woman had secretly bankrupted him consumed him entirely. As Stephanie touched his lapel, Jamal shoved her violently backward onto the floor. She hit the hard wooden planks with a loud thud, weeping as her world shattered. The impact of her knees striking the polished stage echoed sharply through the silent ballroom. Jamal did not reach down to help his weeping wife. Instead, he stepped over her crumpled form, his tailored shoes, carefully avoiding the shimmering fabric of her designer gown. His survival instincts entirely overrode any lingering marital loyalty. He looked out at the sea of disgusted banking executives, his board members, and the federal agents cordoning off the stage. This was no longer a charity gala. It was a crime scene, and Jamal was calculating how to sever himself from the blast. He raised his hands in a gesture of surrender, backing away from the woman who had destroyed his financial empire. He signaled his private security team to escort him to his waiting car. He left Stephanie sobbing on the wooden planks abandoned under the stage lights. Less than 2 hours later, the devastating reality of her new existence materialized inside their downtown penthouse. Stephanie arrived in a discounted rideshare vehicle, her mascara smeared, her glamorous evening obliterated. She unlocked the doors expecting her husband to discuss a defense strategy. Instead, she found Jamal standing in the center of the living room, flanked by 2 corporate attorneys. 3 empty cardboard boxes sat by the entrance. Jamal looked at her with the cold calculation of a banker cutting a catastrophic loss. He dropped a stack of legal documents onto the granite island. The first page displayed the bold heading of their prenuptial agreement. "You have exactly 15 minutes to pack your personal belongings," Jamal stated, his voice devoid of warmth. "I have initiated emergency divorce proceedings to insulate my assets from your fraudulent liabilities. The prenup contains a strict financial disclosure clause. By secretly acquiring high-interest debt under my name, you violated the terms of our marriage. You get absolutely nothing." Stephanie stared at the legal papers, her breath catching in her throat. She tried to step forward, reaching out a trembling hand, but the attorneys blocked her path. "Jamal, please," she begged, her voice cracking with raw desperation. "We can fix this. I will pay it all back. We are a team." "We are not a team," Jamal interrupted sharply, his eyes narrowing with disgust. "You are a financial parasite. You used my name to fund your fake internet lifestyle, and your mother used stolen property to implicate me in a federal commercial lending scheme. My banking license is currently under review by federal regulators because of your greed. You are leaving this penthouse tonight, and you are leaving with exactly what you brought into this relationship: nothing. Pack your bags before I have you physically removed for trespassing." The sheer finality in his tone paralyzed her. There was no room for manipulation, no audience to perform for, and no enabling mother to rescue her from the consequences of her actions. Under the watchful gaze of the corporate lawyers, Stephanie stumbled into the master bedroom. She pulled a single rolling suitcase from the closet, her hands shaking violently. She reached for the expensive designer dresses, luxury handbags, and imported shoes purchased with stolen money. "Leave them," Jamal commanded from the doorway. "Every item in this apartment purchased during our marriage belongs to me under the breach of contract. Take your basic clothing and get out." Stripped of her extravagant armor, Stephanie packed a few mundane sweaters, a pair of jeans, and basic toiletries. The golden child who had spent her entire adult life mocking my practical existence was now violently expelled from the high society world she had sacrificed my future to inhabit. She dragged the meager suitcase toward the foyer, the wheels squeaking loudly. Jamal did not offer a final goodbye. He turned his back, staring out the windows at the city skyline, focused on salvaging his endangered career. The heavy doors slammed shut behind her, the deadbolt clicking into place with terrifying finality. Stephanie rode the elevator down to the ground floor, her body numb with shock. She walked out into the freezing Chicago wind, shivering in her thin evening gown. She expected to find quiet refuge on the street, but the nightmare was far from over. A massive crowd had gathered near the valet circle. Brilliant red and blue lights illuminated the pavement. Two local news vans were parked haphazardly along the curb, capturing the unfolding scene. A heavy-duty flatbed tow truck was backing up toward the main entrance. Standing in the center of the chaotic scene were two federal agents directing the tow operator. Stephanie watched in absolute horror as thick steel chains were securely fastened to the axles of the gleaming midnight black Porsche Macan. The vehicle she proudly paraded on social media yesterday was being hoisted onto the ramp. The flashing lights caught the red velvet bow unceremoniously tossed onto the dirty sidewalk. The federal agents were officially impounding the stolen vehicle as primary evidence. A news reporter stood under a bright spotlight, speaking urgently into a microphone, broadcasting the complete financial ruin of her family to the entire city on live television. Stephanie ducked behind a concrete pillar, desperately hiding her tearful face from the roving camera lenses. The freezing wind bit through her thin fabric, chilling her to the bone. She stood alone in the shadows, clutching her cheap suitcase. She had no money, no home, and her husband had completely discarded her. Her mother was sitting in a federal holding cell, facing years in prison for identity theft. With shaking, frostbitten fingers, Stephanie reached into her small purse and pulled out her cell phone. She scrolled through her extensive list of contacts, bypassing the wealthy elite socialites who would never speak to her again. She pressed the call button, listening to the agonizingly slow, hollow ringing tone. She raised the phone to her ear, the tears freezing against her pale cheeks as she waited for her father Richard to finally answer desperately, hoping he had a warm, safe place for her to sleep. Richard answered the phone on the fourth ring. His voice sounded hollow and entirely drained of life. When Stephanie choked out the pathetic reality that she was standing on the freezing street with nothing but a single cheap suitcase, he did not offer a comforting platitude. There was no strength left in him to pretend everything would be fine. He gave her the address of a highly depressing, dilapidated motel located near the downtown police precinct. He had spent the last several agonizing hours pacing the sticky floors of the station, desperately trying to arrange bail for my mother. The brutal reality of their new existence crashed down upon both of them that very night. The luxurious lifestyle my family had proudly paraded around the elite circles of Chicago was nothing more than a fragile, hollow illusion built entirely on stolen money, fabricated success, and massive hidden debt. The bill had come due, and the cost was catastrophic. Stephanie dragged her small bag into the dingy motel room, collapsing onto a stained mattress. She wept until her throat burned, mourning the humiliating loss of her wealthy husband, her endless bank accounts, and her once glamorous social standing. The following morning, Richard met with a high-profile criminal defense attorney. The initial consultation hour alone cost more than his entire monthly mortgage payment. When the seasoned lawyer reviewed the mountain of pristine forensic evidence I had formally handed over to Agent Davis, he was brutally honest about their dismal prospects. Brenda was facing decades in federal prison for committing severe interstate wire fraud and highly aggravated identity theft. The only possible way to negotiate a plea deal and marginally reduce her mandatory sentence was to mount an incredibly aggressive, multi-layered legal defense. That required an exorbitant, non-refundable retainer fee paid entirely upfront in cleared certified funds. Richard, the ultimate cowardly enabler, who had spent his entire marriage looking the other way to preserve a toxic peace, finally faced the ultimate crushing consequence of his lifelong complicity. To afford the staggering legal fees necessary to keep his wife from spending the remainder of her natural life behind heavy steel bars, he had to completely liquidate their only remaining genuine financial asset. He was forced to immediately list the sprawling, beautifully manicured family home on the aggressive, unforgiving real estate market. Because they desperately needed the massive amount of cash immediately to pay the lawyers, Richard accepted a predatory, heavily discounted offer far below the actual market value of the beautiful house. The expansive, multi-level suburban home where I had grown up, the specific place where my mother had constantly criticized my practical financial choices while praising Stephanie for her entirely superficial success, was gone in a matter of agonizing days. Richard and Stephanie packed whatever modest belongings they could physically fit into a small, battered, rented moving truck. They permanently relocated to a cramped, depressing two-bedroom apartment situated in a dangerous, neglected, rundown neighborhood on the far industrial outskirts of the city. The notoriously thin walls offered absolutely no protection from the blaring, endless noise of the dirty, congested street outside. The harsh, flickering fluorescent lighting illuminated the absolute, inescapable misery of their brand-new reality. Stephanie, who had once shamelessly boasted about her expansive designer wardrobe and her exclusive downtown penthouse views, now spent her bleak days sitting on a cheap, broken secondhand sofa. She stared blankly at the peeling paint on the tiny living room wall, completely stripped of her once undeniable golden child status. Richard was forced to take a minimum wage job as a retail clerk at a local hardware store just to keep the dim lights on and pay for their most basic generic groceries. His previously clean, manicured hands were now covered in deep, painful dirt and rough calluses. The golden child and her enabling father were completely trapped in a suffocating, inescapable nightmare of their own reckless making. 3 agonizing months later, the tedious federal court proceedings finally concluded. Despite the incredibly expensive defense attorney, Richard had sacrificed his beautiful home to hire the sheer volume of undeniable, meticulous, heavily documented evidence I had personally provided left absolutely no room for judicial leniency. The presiding judge looked down from the towering wooden bench with absolute undisguised disgust. He sternly reprimanded my mother for her staggering financial greed and her utter lack of basic maternal morality. Brenda stood shivering in her drab, oversized prison uniform, weeping genuine, pathetic tears of absolute terror as the heavy wooden gavel struck the solid-sounding block with a loud, definitive crack. She was officially sentenced to serve 5 long, agonizing years in a harsh, maximum security federal penitentiary. The strict sentence carried absolutely no possibility of early parole or shortened time for good behavior. The arrogant matriarch who had cruelly ruled our fractured family with an iron fist of toxic manipulation was forcefully led away in heavy steel handcuffs. She was permanently stripped of her precious freedom, her highly coveted social status, and her last remaining shred of human dignity. That same evening, as the harsh, undeniable reality of his completely ruined life fully settled over him, Richard sat completely alone in his tiny, dark, freezing apartment. The heavy, oppressive silence in the dilapidated room was absolutely deafening to him. He stared at his cheap prepaid cellular phone, his calloused hands shaking violently with sheer desperation. He slowly dialed my personal phone number, the exact same number he had not bothered to call when my mother was actively stealing my entire future. The call went straight to my automated voicemail system. He pressed the cracked plastic phone tightly against his ear, his voice breaking into a pathetic, agonizing sob. "Naomi, please," he wept into the receiver, the sound of his utterly broken spirit echoing permanently through the digital recording. "We have absolutely nothing left in this world. We are freezing and starving. Please, you have to help us now. I am begging you on my knees." I listened to the pathetic, agonizing sob of my father, echoing from the voicemail recording. I did not feel a single ounce of sympathy or guilt. He had stood by while my mother orchestrated my financial ruin, advising me to keep the peace and let my sister enjoy the fruits of my labor. He chose his side long before the federal agents breached that luxury penthouse. With a calm, steady motion, I pressed the delete button, erasing his voice and his manufactured desperation from my life forever. I blocked his number, just as I had blocked every other relative who had flooded my phone with vile insults when they thought I was a mentally unstable liability. 6 months passed since the gavel struck the sounding block in that federal courtroom. The changing seasons mirrored the profound transformation in my own reality. The brutal Chicago winter thawed into a brilliant, vibrant spring, and the ashes of my toxic family dynamic fertilized the soil of my ultimate triumph. The legal system, often slow and cumbersome, moved with surprising efficiency when presented with an impenetrable wall of forensic evidence. The civil litigation against my parents concluded with a spectacular, uncontested victory on my behalf. The presiding judge did not merely order the full restitution of my stolen $150,000. Recognizing the severe malicious nature of the fraud and the deliberate calculated emotional distress inflicted upon me, the court awarded maximum punitive compensation. I was granted an additional $300,000 in treble damages extracted directly from the forced liquidation of my parents' suburban estate. My meticulously managed house fund, which my mother had so arrogantly drained to buy my sister a sports car, had tripled in value. The money my family tried to steal became the very instrument of their absolute poverty and my soaring elevation. My professional career experienced a similar meteoric rise. Following the devastating exposure of Jamal and his highly illegal commercial lending scheme, my firm conducted an extensive internal review of our investigation protocols, Mr. Harrison recognizing my clinical precision. Unflinching resolve and unwavering commitment to financial justice called me into his executive office. He did not close the blinds this time, with the door wide open for the entire accounting floor to witness. He formally offered me a massive promotion. I was unanimously appointed as the new director of forensic accounting for the entire Chicago branch. I moved out of my small cubicle and into a sprawling glass-walled corner office that commanded respect from every executive who walked through our doors. With my career flourishing and a heavily fortified bank account, I finally abandoned my modest rental apartment. I purchased an ultra-modern, sprawling luxury penthouse located in the very heart of the downtown financial district. It was a masterpiece of contemporary architecture, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows, custom marble finishes, and a private wraparound terrace hovering like a glass fortress above the bustling city streets. I stepped out onto the expansive balcony, the cool evening breeze catching the hem of my silk robe. The sun was beginning to set over Lake Michigan, painting the sprawling Chicago skyline in breathtaking shades of deep violet and brilliant gold. The city lights flickered to life, illuminating the towering skyscrapers and busy avenues below. I held a crystal glass filled with an incredibly rare, expensive vintage red wine, savoring the rich, complex notes as I looked down at the world I had conquered. The suffocating weight of my mother, constant criticism, my sister unearned entitlement, and my father cowardly enabling had been completely lifted from my shoulders. I was breathing free, clean air for the first time in 33 years. The profound silence of my luxury terrace was suddenly interrupted by the soft, persistent chiming of my personal cell phone resting on a nearby glass table. I walked over. Slowly, my bare feet silent against the smooth, heated stone tiles, I picked up the device, glancing at the illuminated screen. It was an incoming call from an unregistered, prepaid cellular number. I tapped the screen to answer, holding the phone to my ear without speaking. Naomi, a frail, trembling voice whispered through the crackling connection. It was Stephanie. The former golden child sounded completely unrecognizable. Her signature arrogance and manufactured high society confidence had been entirely hollowed out. Please do not hang up on me, Stephanie begged, her words rushing together in a desperate, panicked stream. I have nowhere else to turn. Jamal finalized the divorce. He left me with absolute mountains of debt, and nobody will hire me because of the public scandal. Dad lost his retail job yesterday because he is too sick to stand on his feet. We have not eaten a proper meal in 3 days, and our landlord is threatening to change the locks on our apartment tomorrow morning. I know you hate me, but I am begging you for just a few $100s, just enough to buy some cheap groceries and keep the electricity on. We are starving, Naomi. Please, you have so much now. Just help me. I listened to her pathetic weeping. Please, hearing the exact same desperate tone my father had used 6 months ago. She was still expecting me to act as their endless financial safety net. She still believed that playing the victim would manipulate me into sacrificing my own hard-earned resources to save her from the consequences of her horrific actions. I did not offer a single word of comfort. I did not deliver a lecture on morality karma or the bitter irony of her current destitution. I simply smiled, a genuine, completely peaceful smile that radiated from the very core of my soul. I lowered the phone from my ear, looking at the glowing screen one last time. With a deliberate, satisfying tap, I hit block. Dropping the phone onto a plush sunbed, I slowly took a deep sip of expensive red wine, finally and completely at peace. The screen fades to solid black. The story of Naomi serves as a powerful reminder that sharing genetics does not give anyone the right to exploit your life or destroy your future. The most profound lesson we can take away from this staggering betrayal is the vital importance of establishing absolute boundaries, even with those we call family. Society often pressures us to forgive and forget in the name of keeping the peace, but true peace should never come at the cost of your own financial or emotional survival. Naomi did not react with blind rage or hysterical tears. Instead, she used her sharp intelligence and undeniable truth to dismantle a toxic system that had treated her as nothing more than a disposable resource. Her journey teaches us that walking away from abusive relatives is not an act of cruelty, but a deeply necessary act of self-preservation. We must learn to recognize when loyalty is being weaponized against us, and have the courage to choose our own well-being over a fake illusion of familial harmony. You owe absolutely nothing to people who only value you for what they can take. Please share your own experiences with setting difficult family boundaries in the comments below.